Hello and welcome to Lightmap from SIFTER. My name is Gianni and my co-host on this episode is Daniel. Thank you for joining us.
Hey there, everybody. How are we doing today?
On Lightmap, we explore what it takes to make video games and interactive media, and we meet creative people from all around the world. It's a guide to that interesting new gameplay experiences, and every episode we talk to developers, artists, musicians, researchers, and more. Our guest on Lightmap this week is Nicolai Troshinsky, who is artist and animator and the chief cheater on the game Card Shark. Who also worked with Nerial as part of that. Nicolai, thank you so much for joining us on this episode.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure.
The art in this game is really captivating, and it looks unlike most games we've ever played, so we're excited to learn more about your process, Nicolai. But before we get into the interview, let's find out what's been making the news this week on Walkthrough.
Hi, I'm Kyle Pauletto, and here are the top stories this week on Walkthrough, SIFTER's weekly news podcast for Sunday, 24th of July. Ubisoft announces several delays and cancellations of upcoming games. Mojang says NFTs will never be added to Minecraft. Aussie soccer star Sam Kerr to grace the covers of FIFA 23. Twitch announces ban list sharing for partners. And Discord chat is coming to Xbox consoles. You can get every episode of Walkthrough for free on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, on our website, sifter.com.au, or wherever you like to listen every Sunday.
Australia's best video game podcast.
This is Lightmap. Get every episode free on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and sifter.com.au.
Nicolai, if people haven't come across the game before, what is Card Shark?
Card Shark is a game about card cheating set in 18th century France, pre-revolution. So you are a nobody who joins a mysterious character who calls himself the Comte of Saint-Germain, and he will teach you how to cheat at cards, and you will travel with him all around France and parts of Europe, swindling other aristocrats and nobles for their money.
Now, I understand the inspiration behind this game comes pretty directly from a 1975 Stanley Kubrick film.
Yes. So a lot of people have noticed the similarities, and that's because we did not try to hide them. On the opposite, I'm quite proud of taking that inspiration. So yeah, Barry Lyndon is a movie I loved since I was a teenager, so many times. And some years ago, like I don't really keep track anymore, but maybe like 6 to 8 years ago, I started learning card magic as a hobby, just for fun to make tricks for friends. And as I was practicing and learning tricks, I remember this scene from Barry Lyndon, which is very memorable, where the main hero cheats at cards. And it's just this tiny scene, maybe 10 minutes in a 3-hour movie. But it's very interesting scene. And from that perspective of being in the process of learning card magic and doing tricks, it made a lot of sense. And the connection kind of was made that, actually this scene, it could be the concept of an entire game, just this tiny episode. So I started thinking about that, and slowly it started to develop.
How long have you been working on the game, and how long did it take to take that idea and make it into something playable?
Well, the idea, from the moment I had the idea to the moment I actually pitched it to Arnaud, who I worked with, who was the designer and producer on the game, maybe a couple of years passed, where it was just an idea in the back of my head, which was, yeah, this would be really cool. I don't have the resources to make this, so it's just a cool idea I have. Then things kind of aligned. Like Arnaud just finished Pikuniku, he was interested in doing something. I told him about this, he got really excited, and so this was around December 2018. So I spent that the end of the year making a storyboard for how the game could work. And we started working a prototype from that. So that was about a year where they were still working on other projects. They were still on one of the Reigns projects and other stuff. So we were kind of on and off working on Card Shark for a year on a prototype, and then a couple of years of actual production. So 3 years in total for me, but it depends, like different amount of time for different people on the team.
As somebody that doesn't know too much about card tricks and the world of all of that, were all of the different, I guess, schemes in the game when you're using different card tricks, are they all based in reality, or did you design any of them specifically for Card Sharks?
So the individual techniques are all 100% real. All the methods, no, for doing stuff, and I did a bunch of research on this. Some things I knew already because they overlap with card magic. Some things are super specific to card cheating, and a lot of it is drawn from a very influential book called The Expert at the Card Table, which is a book supposedly about card cheating, but it was mostly useful for card magic. Many people speculate that the writer who presents itself as a cheater who needed money and therefore revealed his secrets in reality was maybe a magician, because it's written under a pseudonym. Nobody knows who he really was, but the fantasy is still really interesting, no? Like a cheater who reveals his tricks in the book. So a lot of stuff was drawn from there. Some stuff was drawn from other references, including some bits from Steve Forte, who is an expert at card cheating and cheating prevention, was worked as a consultant for Las Vegas casinos. And so the techniques are in itself are all real. I guess what was more interpretation was how to put them together. Because if you buy like a book on techniques for card cheating or some videos or I don't know, like it's very hard to find, or I have not found anywhere where it teaches you, okay, how to put this all together in a practical game. And maybe they don't, because that's kind of sketchy. So maybe hard to sell a book like this officially. But basically, they will teach you, okay, here's how you can steal cards, here's how you can stack cards. But they won't teach you a whole strategy. Okay, here's how you win at poker in a practical sense. So you have to kind of infer all of that from the individual things. And that's the part that I did, that the sequences and how those sequences make sense, that was my interpretation. And for the most part, I think they make sense, but they also assume a lot of things. Like we never tell which game you're playing, and that's on purpose, because it's not the focus of the game, but also it leaves us a lot of more design freedom. Like we don't have to justify why you need high cards, why you need low cards, why you just need them, because whatever game you're playing. So I would say some of the sequences are really genuine, and some are a bit more fantasy in the sense that they make sense. You could do that, but there are a lot of other things that will be more practical in a real life scenario. So no cheater will ever do some of those things, even though they still make sense.
That reminds me of a story. I've been rewatching Breaking Bad again, and I've just been going through some interviews, and they said for the scenes involved with cooking meth, they can't actually show specifically in detail what the characters are doing for obvious reasons,
Yes.
but they still have to toe that line of making it believable, making people understand what's happening, and it's a very complicated scientific process. And it's the same for card cheating. So I'm curious, from a gameplay perspective, how did you walk through the different sequences with involving and introducing the player to the mechanics before increasing the complexity as you go on throughout the story?
So how this was done, well, the short answer is a lot of iteration and and playtesting. But basically, we started with the tricks themselves, and I made mock-up animations of all the tricks that I thought could work basically, from all my research, I selected stuff that could be translated into interaction and that was useful for sequences. And I also tried to have a good representation of all the variety of methods. Because if we are telling people, okay, this is a game about card cheating, I thought that to fulfill that promise, there had to be every major move in card cheating represented. So I did all these tiny animations, which were like ideas of, okay, this is how it's going to look and how it's broadly going to work. And we start from there. And then I made sequences. Okay, this is a sequence where you're stealing cards. This is a sequence where you're picking at cards. This is a sequence where you're stacking cards. And all the different variations of how you can do that. And try to think of, okay, how do we make them varied and combine in different interesting ways, and how the complexity evolves over the game. So we started by just putting the sequences in and making a few scenes. And at the beginning, the game had basically no tutorials. It was just, okay, you go here, you do this. You go there, you do this. And so after we had a bunch of those scenes, we started building, okay, how do we teach this? Because, we quickly started to realize we have to teach a lot more than we thought. Like, some people don't even know what suits are, or what is the order on card values. And most people are not familiar with the concept that when the deck is in a certain order and there's a certain amount of players, the cards are dealt in that order, and so they have to be interlaced, all that kind of stuff. So this was mostly done by Daisy, one of the designers, and the good thing, she knew nothing about cards and card cheating, and so from her perspective, it was really useful because I was explaining, okay, this works like this, and this is supposed to do that, but because she was struggling to understand, she was in a good position to kind of teach to the player because she had all those difficulties, no? But it was very slow. I would say probably the most, like the biggest task in the game, design-wise and development-wise, was building all the teaching.
What I found really interesting is there are a number of different ways to interact with the cards. Sometimes you'll be moving the sticks or you'll be pressing the face buttons at certain timings. What were some of the design decisions around the way that you interact with the cards when you're trying to abstract it in that way, so that people can understand what they're doing, but also it's playable?
Yeah, well, that started from those animations, and I already proposed some ideas. And from my perspective, I was trying to, I was working from my experience of manipulating cards. And even though some of the advanced techniques, I cannot really do them fluidly, like expertly, but I can do them slowly, a bit clumsily. I understand what you're supposed to do and what is the feeling and the challenge of doing those things. So I wanted to find interactions that are challenging in the same way, or as similar as possible. Okay, it's like for instance, riffle shuffling is about timing and this control of the speed at which you riffle shuffle. So that should be the kind of challenge you do. And overhand shuffling and stacking is about understanding the sequence. So that should be the challenge. No, so you should have options, and you should be able to mess up in the way you sequence your actions, things like that. So I was trying to propose something that kept the tactile feeling somehow as close as possible, and also the challenge feeling. Then Arnaud, Daisy, Francois, the rest of the team, they were taking that and adapting it. Some things were pretty close to things I proposed. Some changed a lot because simply some were too difficult, and the game is already quite difficult for people, more than I thought. Because I don't know, like I guess I am contaminated by by doing card tricks and being very familiar with it. So for me, it's easier, and it's sometimes I don't really uh, see that it's going to be as difficult as that for people. But anyway, basically, it was a process of simplification. Like, okay, how do we make this playable? How do we make it so that people don't get stuck and and just give up the game? So I know people complain about QuickTime events, and I do also. And we all, like all the team, I think we tried our best to reduce that to as little as possible. But there were just some cases where the complexity of the techniques, the amount of techniques we had, the amount of things that we have to design, because every little game is a unique mini game that basically shares almost nothing with the others. So all of them have to be designed and play tested, whatnot. At some point, we need to make the trade-off. So it's like, okay, this works here. It's a simple solution. There could be a more elegant one, but at the same time, we have so many other things. So we try to balance that out. So in some cases, not the best solution, but it was the best solution, I would say, in practical sense for us to be able to finish the game on time.
What I really liked was it took me a while to get my head into the right place, but once I could see that you were teaching me the system of what we needed to do in this particular thing, it made me feel like a genius when I got it. That was something that I thought was really clever, but I really appreciated the ability to be able to practice many times, because when I first look at some of these challenges, you have to concentrate in this game, otherwise you'll end up in trouble or you'll end up dead, basically. Can you tell me a little bit about, balancing that challenge a bit more? Because, you have a number of different difficulties as part of this game, and I've tried a few of the different ones. And even on the simple difficulty, it can be quite complex. And if you fail, there are ways to get through these things as well. How did you sort of balance where that difficulty lied?
Well, the thing is, we had to gamble a little bit ourselves too. So, because you have to produce a fair amount to be able to test it. The way the game is structured and the way the concept works, you have all these different techniques and all these different scenes, and each scene has its own sequence and has a concept on how it works. It's very hard to change afterwards because there's writing involved. There is a lot of design work involved, and so I'm trying to say is we try to anticipate, and in some cases we succeeded, and in some we didn't. Like for instance, the sequence when you return to the cafe and you have to memorize cards. A lot of people find that super super challenging, and that was not the idea. Like people feel a difficulty spike at that moment. That was not entirely intentional, but we didn't really have much leeway around it. Like that scene was designed that way to offer some kind of novelty. And in our heads, it was like, yeah, you just pick four of a kind and a random card. That's not difficult to remember. But people take a while to realize that, and they get very frustrated until they do. So once you realize there's a very simple method to do it, the scene becomes very easy. But a lot of people rush through it and get frustrated and forget and whatnot. So that was kind of not entirely anticipated. And then, yeah, okay, what else can I say on this? Like, again, like leaving the option to rehearse as much as you want was added later. I don't know, somewhere in the middle of development, because we realized, okay, people really need to be able to practice things, and people really need reminders of older things, because once you're like in scene 10, you might not remember what you did in scene 5, and so you need to be able to re-practice that little bit and things like that. So we started to add little help everywhere. And often what we did is, if we realize on playtesting that people get stuck and repeatedly fail something, we start adding little helpers here and there, like maybe tweak the UI to make it help a little bit more, maybe tweak how it's framed in terms of how the trick is presented, or the amount of rounds you need to win, or things like that. It was very difficult, as I say, because by the time we are testing things and we are able to see, by the time there's enough of it built, we are very deep in the project. Like, it's not like you build a platform and you can test levels. Like the tech is there and you can start testing levels and testing mechanics. Here you have to build a huge amount of stuff to be able to test it. So you have to kind of gamble a bit. And at the time you test, if it doesn't work, either you remove it or you try to simplify it by adding, like, simplifying controls or simplifying the UI or stuff like that. And some stuff we couldn't remove because it was embedded in the narrative. So the scene is written because there's this sequence that was thought out, it's storyboarded, the scene is written, it has to work, and the entire scene falls apart. And maybe we already send the text for translation, so it has to be done. So one moment we struggled with was the when you throw a card, and there's this moment in the game where you throw a card at the opponent's seat, and that was super hard to make work and not to get people stuck there and die repeatedly. And it had to be done because it's tied to the narrative and things like that. So it was a challenge.
It's definitely interesting hearing you use the word gamble. I guess in some aspects, life imitates art in that regard. And on that note, I'm actually really curious to hear about the inspiration behind the art style of the game and what that process was like.
The process was, I'm an illustrator, and I have worked on children and adult books, and I also animation filmmaker. I've done a bunch of animation shorts and commissions. So this style is kind of taking a lot of stuff that I have done in the past and putting them together in a way that I have not done in the past, but is also very familiar. So this is the technique is a process called monoprinting, which is the process of spreading paint on the surface and stamping it. And this allows you to create lots of different textures and effects because you can manipulate the paint in different ways, and you can also stamp it in different ways. And the beauty of this technique is it you cannot do much fine detail because it gets lost once you stamp. You need an amount of paint, so you cannot do tiny lines and little details. But it gives you a lot of detail in the texture it creates. The texture is really intricate, and it has that you can see like the paint, like the regularities of the paint, and that gives you this kind of high detail and low detail at the same time. So because I knew we would want to remind or evoke the painterly aesthetic of Baroque painting, but I did not want to make a Baroque painting myself. So, and it's a video game, so I think it needs to be modern in a way. So this was all trying to find this perfect balance between classical and modern, where it's really modern in a way, the way the compositions are made, like everything is very exaggerated, the proportions are completely absurd, the perspective never makes sense, things like that. Because, well, I guess this is part of my interest as an illustrator, but also part of my criticism of art in video games. I find very few video games that are free of the constraint of reality and perspective and proportions. Like for me, as an Illustrator, it's very liberating when you can just cheat in that visual sense. Like the perspective doesn't make sense, proportions don't make sense, but now you're free. Now you can do whatever. And once you establish it and it's consistent and it's presented as a thing that's done on purpose, the player accepts anything. So then you're really free to play with the image and to create all these little scenes. And that really makes a lot of stuff very, very easy from a practical standpoint, like how to set up characters on the scene and everything like that. You don't care about perspective at all. So, and you're really free to do whatever you want. So for me, that technique was kind of this balance. Okay, I can make big shapes, simple compositions, because everything has to be basically reduced to simple shapes. But then I have that high resolution detail of the actual texture, and it looks like painting. It looks enough like painting, basically. And also that allows you to make backgrounds that have no outline. That also makes them look more like painting. So you can have outline on your characters, and your characters really stand out very easily. And the characters also deliberately drawn very loose. Just a few lines, and that's to facilitate trickery in the animation, because the puppets are not really rigged in a traditional sense. All the pieces are kind of floating. They're not attached to each other exactly. So that means you can suggest three-dimensional movement by overlapping the pieces in different ways. And because they are drawn very loose, you will accept that like a shoulder is out of place. Well, it kind of looks like the character has turned a little bit sideways. You accept it even though the image is just misplacing a little bit. And in motion, it works. And that only works if your art style is loose enough to allow for those inconsistencies that pieces don't really fall in place all the time.
Do you build it on a 3D plane? Is that the way that you design it, or is it as a two-dimensional scene when you're building it?
It's all two-dimensional. So we just use a draw order number for where things are. And so no, not really, no 3D effects.
As an illustrator myself, that was just fascinating to listen to, like the whole process of monoprinting and the imperfections specifically that you mentioned. Creating it digitally, did you completely recreate it just, in, I guess, a program like Photoshop, or was there any element of traditional painting as well that you've scanned in for the game?
But yeah, everything is scanned.
Oh, really?
So there's no digital painting at all in the game. Like
oh, wow.
So all the backgrounds are just like hundreds of prints of tiny little blobs and squares and lines that are printed, and then they're colored digitally. So all the prints are made black and white, and they are tinted in two colors. Like the white is tinted in one color, the black is tinted in another, and so everything is like this overlapping of shapes in two colors, and the characters are drawn in ink and also colored in digitally.
Yeah, that's because I did notice during the beginning of the game in my playthrough that time of day changes and affects the color palette as well, but all the shapes are remaining consistent. So I was wondering if you had to redo that entirely or just sort of tweak the colors as you needed for the scene.
Depending on the scene, some scenes they allow to just in-game, like with the post-process effects, to tint things enough to make them look different. Some others didn't. So the very extreme ones is basically the entire same illustration like that, but I retinted everything in basically digitally in Photoshop to the new palette. So just in the beginning of the game, like the exterior landscape you see, the day and night one are obviously done by me digitally specifically, because that's a very extreme change. You cannot achieve that, or at least not not very well. You can achieve that, but I was not happy with how that looked. But the interior of the tavern, you have more leeway in how it's made. So it kind of depends on the scene and how the scene is, kind of how the neutral lighting is, how much it allows you to manipulate.
Do you have a favorite location or a favorite piece that you put together?
Yeah, I have a few. Like, okay, let me think. I really like the pistol duel landscape. Like, there's a scene where it's a pistol duel, and there's this little landscape, and that one. It was really easy for some reason. It really came together very fast. I was very happy with it. It looks like a painting. I guess that's part what I like about it. Really like the baths, because it has this nice ambience to it. Like I think you can feel the warmth of the baths, and it's kind of pleasant to look at in this a relaxing way. But yeah, there are a lot. I really like the Pompadour Saloon, because there was this goal. Okay, we need to, at some moment in the game, have this really luxurious palace that looks crowded. Like, I also pushed a lot for that. Like, I wanted crowds of people, because I wanted the game to feel like a world, to feel alive, to be populated, of many people populating the world. So that was a huge work, because it means creating lots of assets for NPCs in the background, and there are like maybe about 2,000 individual pieces for characters. So, but the fantasy is fulfilled. Like, I want you to enter these big places, and they're full of people. You have all these crowds, and so that one, I think it really. That what hits the nail for me. Like, okay, that's what I wanted. This huge golden palace, really luxurious, really baroque, really full of people, massive chandeliers.
You can communicate a lot more because the player is bringing in their imagination to kind of fill in the blanks of what you've represented effectively.
Yeah, that's a lot of the idea, that suggest rather than show. It's always more powerful. And I think I deliberately try to do some of that in the design, where a few blobs, they suggest something in the background and people read it. Also in the animation, because of all this all this trickery with there's very few pieces for characters, and you manage to make them work, turn around and everything. And a lot of that is just suggested. People imagine the frames in between. Also, the 12, it's deliberately animated in 12 frames per second, no interpolations. So I think that facilitates that concept of, you imagine things in between the frames, and you imagine the better version in between the frames. But for me, it's more than saving work. Is the importance of things like that is the freedom it gives you creatively later. Like, maybe you save work, maybe you don't, because as you say, in the end, you still have to think about it and make it work. So I'm not entirely sure how much work it saves, but I think it certainly, for me, it leaves you with more design freedom, because you can get away with a lot more things. So I always feel that realism is this prison where you have to, now that you establish there are shadows. Okay, well, now there had to be shadows everywhere. Now that you establish this perspective, well, now there has to be perspective everywhere. And at some point, it's going to annoy you, because you want to do something, and there is something that's hard to solve because you have this thing. So the less you have of those things, the more free you are to design and do what you need.
Do you have big piles of all of the works that you've created? And is it in a state that could be displayed in some format, or are they just kind of, once you finish with them, are they gone?
There is a big pile. I took a picture of it. It's we released an art book, a digital art book on PDF on Steam. And there is a picture of the big pile. Well, there's several pictures, but there's one of the big pile on it, because I thought it was funny, and it was like worth a picture. And I don't know, it must be how much? It must be like 20 centimeters high or something. I don't know. It's a lot of paper. It might be like easily 4,000 to 5,000 pieces of paper. And you could display it, but a lot of it is really disjointed blobs of paint. Like they don't look like much isolated. You have to kind of explain, oh, this belongs to this, if you see it all together. So for practical reasons, none of it was done to look pretty as a maybe just like the sketches for backgrounds. There were like full sketches of backgrounds on a single piece of paper. Those look nice, but a lot of it looks like disjointed stuff.
I'm just curious. People have had a chance to play this game now. The reaction seems to be really positive. People really enjoying what it's done. How do you feel about having this game that you worked on for several years out there for people to play and enjoy?
I'm super happy, very, very proud. It does feel strange because, it's been a while and it works. And that's kind of crazy that it works. I think, so the most satisfying thing is some people are very passionate about it, and that's what's important. Like I know there's always going to be people like it more, people like it less. As long as there's people who are really fascinated, that makes me truly, truly happy. That makes you feel like you succeeded. Like I guess I personally measure success by the kinds of reactions, not by like commercial success or stuff like that, because you like hope to be understood, and when you see people understand what you try to do and really feel the things you wanted them to feel, that is success. So there are a few like reactions online, reactions from streamers, a few articles that came out that were truly like exactly what we wanted, and so that feels really, really good. It feels like okay, well, we did our job, and also the fan art is very funny. That was not one of my hopes. I did not try to make iconic characters on purpose. So seeing that people really stick to the characters and they like them and they want to draw them, they're recognizable in the fan art, is surprising to me. Like, oh, that's something new that works. And also seeing some magicians being very appreciate the how much it's stays true to the real thing. Like I think magicians often are used to seeing magic and cheating represented in very unrealistic ways in cinema, and being frustrated with things like, oh yeah, of course you would never do that, that's absurd, that's just not possible. And they're very surprised, and so far they're also very happy to see represented the work, the work it takes to do that.
Well, I can tell you I learnt a lot more in this game than I expected coming into it. It is a beautiful game to look at, and one that I'll think about for a really long time and suggest to many people this is what games can be. They don't have to be those things that you automatically expect out of video games. So thank you so much for making it and for joining us and talking a little bit about Card Shark.
Thank you. Yeah, it was a pleasure.
Card Shark is available now. You can play it on Switch or you can pick it up on the computer. You can find more information about it by heading to cardsharkgame.com. SIFTER is produced by Nicholas Kennedy, Fiona Bartholomaeus, Daniel Ang, who was my co-host on this episode. Thank you for joining me, Daniel.
Thanks for having me, Gianni.
Adam Christou, Mitch Lowe is our senior producer, and my name is Giovanni, and I am the executive producer. Thanks to Omny Studio for their support of SIFTER's 3 podcasts. You can find links to everything we talked about on our website. That is sifter.com.au, where you can read more about the games and the guests that we featured.
If you also enjoyed this episode, why not join the SIFTER community? You can also share your creativity with others in our very chill server filled with awesome people. You can find that at sifter.com.au/Discord. To get there, that's sifter.com.au/Discord. And also, if we could have your moment for attention, could you please share the show? It is the #1 free thing you can do to support us. Word of mouth is really important to indie podcasts like this one, so let your friends know if you reckon they'll enjoy it. Send them a link, make it easy for them to take part in the show, and we will love you forever for it. And that is my personal promise to you.
That's all the time we have for this episode. Nicolai, thank you so much again for joining us on this episode for a really fascinating conversation about the art and the craft of the card cheating game.
Thank you.
And until next time, have fun.